fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. This is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, real therapists. If you have a question you'd like to ask or advice you'd like to give, come on over to podtherapy.net and join our conversation. We have a special guest on today's show. I don't want to give away who it is, but he's kind of like us, but with wisdom and integrity.
Jay-Z.
And now, broadcasting from Level 9 Studios, that guy is Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some Pod Therapy. Okay.
You're nodding at each other.
Yeah. We nod a lot.
We mostly can't see that on a podcast.
Yeah, most of the podcast is just us nodding like, do you want to talk?
Did you want to go in? So we should probably introduce the audience to that third voice.
No, let's not.
Let's not. Let's just go through the entire podcast, and at the end they have to guess who that guy was.
Go ahead. Radio
yeah, we can just throw him in there. So I will introduce our special guest. We have with us Mr. Jake Wiskerchen. He is a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Nevada, a national certified counselor. He is the host of the now award-winning Noggin Notes podcast, which friends of our podcast have heard about before. He is also the owner of Zephyr Wellness, which is a behavioral health company in Reno, and he is, hold on to your hats, the president of the Nevada Board of Examiners for marriage and family therapists and clinical professional counselors, and I hope that everything we're going to talk about today, Jake, is off the record and cannot used against me whenever I reapply for licensure.
I disavow any knowledge, and the jury will disregard any
That's
statements
right.
you just heard.
Excellent.
This is not subpoenable testimony. Nothing that we say or hear today can be used against Jim.
Thanks for that awesome introduction, though.
Absolutely.
It makes me sound cooler than I am.
Well, what makes you seem less cool is the Wolfpack T-shirt that you're wearing. He is repping UNR, and for those who are not local listeners, there's a deep and abiding rivalry between University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and University of Nevada, Reno. Not the least of which is because UNR insists on being just called Nevada.
Well, I mean,
very bothersome.
There's like an 80-year history that precedes the founding of UNLV. So
that's true.
I mean, you guys used to be called Nevada Southern before you decided to take on the Nevada moniker and and make it your own Vegas thing.
Yeah. Well, we also take on the entire tax burden for the state, so we thought, why not? I mean, why not just take it all?
And for that, we're grateful. So no complaints here.
Shots fired. Reno, if you want to send your hate mail, send it down to Nick.
You guys seem like you've got some stuff you need to discuss. I'm just going to step out.
You're just
going to
be the therapist in the room as we try to bridge the divide.
Before I go, we've got our Pod Therapy guest book. We would love.
Oh, that's right.
We would love to.
We'd love. I saw that when I walked in. And it was
we got the ceremonial signing of the Pod Therapy guest book.
Go ahead and. I don't know why you have to examine it. Don't worry about it.
I don't know.
What I really appreciate is that it's leather bound.
Yeah,
leather bound.
And it smells like rich mahogany.
Yes.
I mean, the name is spelled incorrectly, but
it doesn't matter. Your signature's good, so
oh my God,
perfect.
He signed it.
Yes!
Congratulations, Nick. Nick is now a licensed clinical professional counselor.
Thank you. From the president of the board.
President of the board has signed it with his full knowledge.
What's really funny is that my signature is right below it as Secretary Treasurer also, so this is an old certificate.
It still counts, Nick. Just on there twice, man. Nobody's going to know.
I'm pretty sure I know the signature that's been deleted there, and I'm pretty sure it's Eric Schoen.
It was. It was. Congratulations, Nick, on your new Nevada license as a clinical professional counselor.
You work hard,
yes,
like I have, and then good things will happen.
You pay your dues, and eventually you trick the president of the board into signing.
Absolutely.
Rats.
Work smart, not hard.
And that's how we do it in Nevada.
I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you kids.
All right.
What did I walk into?
If you'd like to see a video of everything that just happened,
I drove
you
7
can.
hours for this.
You drove here? Oh my gosh,
man! I'm busy. I need to decompress and sing loudly in my car with no one judging me.
That's a great time to get caught up on audiobooks. If you'd like to see a video of President Wiskerchen being tricked into this, it is available at podtherapy.net. Definitely check it out. And congratulations, Nick.
Thank you.
Long may your career succeed.
Yeah, welcome to our profession.
Feels good.
Yeah.
Good to know we're keeping the standards low.
We've just dropped it. Yeah, all these interns are going to be calling in like, I listened to the pod. What the hell?
Nevada revised statutes does say that the board shall set minimum standards. It doesn't say anything about maximum standards.
Yeah, that's right. There's no ceiling on those.
That's right.
So, Jake, we want to dig into a little bit about you before we go to our listener mail and questions from the interwebs. But as we were just introducing you to our listeners and telling a little bit about your story, you are from Reno, and you've been practicing up there for how long?
Well, before I was licensed by the state to do therapy, I was doing subclinical therapy. We don't call it that, but it's in-home work with children and adolescents and adults. So I really started my career in the beginning of 2009, tail end of 2008. So we're coming up on 9 years now.
Wow.
And officially as a licensed clinician, either intern or fully licensed, 2012 I got licensed. So I'm coming up on my 6th anniversary of that.
Wow.
I own Zephyr Wellness. I co-own it with my business partner, Lindsay, and we employ roughly 17 people. Not all of them are technically employees because some of them are student intern volunteers. Either they're graduate students working through their practicum hours or they're undergraduates, and we have some agreements with like Head Start and the school district and stuff. And so we push in and we teach social and emotional learning to the Head Start folks with the undergraduates who have designs on becoming therapists later in life, and they get that training and then they get supervision about that. And so we get to do that, and that's my thing. Like Zephyr Wellness is the baby. We have 2 locations. One's in rural Nevada in Silver Springs.
Oh, wow. I didn't know about the second one. That's great.
And that's in Lyon County, and so we're really active in the rural areas too, trying to make some change. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Nevada is very urbanized in that our population centers of Reno and Vegas have the concentrations of roughly 2.5 million people of the 3 million in our state live in those 2 areas, and then the rest are spread across the other roughly 85,000 square miles of
One
Nevada.
of the most sparsely populated states. We're basically a barbell. Right, so there's the 2 places have everybody, and then this huge swath of territory where there are probably more horses than humans.
I would probably agree with that, actually, and it sounds funny to say that, but the problem with having such an concentrated urban setting is that resources don't get to the rural areas, and so bringing good quality care to people in our profession, I can speak for my profession of mental wellness, is very challenging because it's hard to get people to move to those areas if they're not used to it and they don't have a passion for rural work, which it's its own beast. But we also we struggle with transportation. So there's new innovative things coming like telehealth and so forth that are helping to facilitate that, and we're trying to lead the curve on that as best as we can as a company.
Is there a demographic or a patient population that Zephyr tends to move toward or might specialize in?
I think that people tend to ask that a lot, but as clinicians,
you have a pretty diverse team.
We do, but beyond that, I think that what we try to do is we try to encourage our students and our interns and then our licensees to have a mind of, if you believe that you're limited in your capacity to treat, you develop that area, not refer out. I don't believe that it's quite ethical to see something that you're uncomfortable with and then refer out. Now, that's not to say that people can't have their wheelhouses. Sure, I certainly have mine. Adolescence is one of those. But if you find yourself deficient, especially in a community like a rural community or a state like Nevada where we're underpowered with therapy people, with clinicians, you want to become as diverse as possible because there may not be an eating disorder person right around the corner to whom you can refer. So it's incumbent upon us as clinicians to go make ourselves effective in that area, seek out continuing education or attend a course or get some consultation and training, and so that we can. I don't want to be jack of all trades because that dilutes your effectiveness, but. I'm not a big fan of referring out just simply because you're uncomfortable. So to that end, I think that our demographic historically has been children, families, and people who have encountered this system, quote unquote, either through social services or juvenile probation, because that's where the bulk of our clinicians cut their teeth as interns and students. So we've made inroads with those types of referral pipelines, but that's not to say that we will turn away the wealthy couple, who with communication issues or whatever.
So kind of all welcome all comers, right? Anybody looking for help, Zephyr's there to be a part of that, and then strategically has stationed itself into places that might not have a whole lot of resource, and it's part of the DNA, the mission of what that organization wants to do. And speaking to that end, I know that so much of what you just said, it just really reflects, I think, the passion that's just naturally there, and how you say, I just care about the entire community. I want to see all of us, kind of rise up. It's not a competitive game. It's more of a collaborative game. And that actually speaks to a lot of your advocacy. A lot of Nevadans know you as somebody who's really been a vocal advocate. You had a radio show up in Reno. I believe it's called Mental Matters.
Yeah, you were a guest on there.
I may have been a guest. So it had some pretty high-profile Nevadans.
Okay, so you brought this up really
I'm just
to kind
saying,
of talk
like,
about
it just
yourself
happened.
being a guest.
Yeah, I mean, it is relevant. I mean, really, Jake brought it up. So, but my point is
you brought class to the show because you dress in vests and ties, and I wear polos and sneakers.
On a radio show.
Yeah, on a radio show.
My mom always said I had a good face for radio, too.
That's right. So, but today, one of the things that you do to try to promote behavioral wellness and try to get people having a proactive conversation is you have the now award-winning podcast, Noggin Notes. Our friends and rivals to the north. You are in our lane, man. But we love you. It's awesome.
But is he?
Is he?
Because
no one is on that level. Take that for what it's worth.
We really are more the Howard Stern version of mental health, I think.
He's doing serious work.
I love listening to Noggin Notes because then I feel like it's a professional experience.
Yeah.
And then I flip it over to us.
That's
and I'm
right.
like,
that's right.
Oh,
Nick,
man.
if only you saw the conditions in which I record in my garage.
I respect it.
Surrounded by neon lights.
His garage / brewery, which we'll get to in a second.
Also true.
But tell us about Noggin Notes. This is a great podcast. It just won the award for Best App. It actually has an app associated with it as well. Tell us about that project.
This is a really cool story. I was in a fraternity in college, and one of my fraternity brothers, Sigma Phi Epsilon, for those of you who are wondering, Sig Ep, one of my fraternity brothers graduated, went to work for IGT, International Game Technology. They do a lot in the gaming arena, and they're very big, based in Nevada. They're very big. And he ended up going overseas to China to work for a little while, ended up in Macau. And then after a while, he left IGT and then eventually, yada, yada, formed his own company. He's doing some app gaming now. And he paired with a guy named Lauren Stout is his name. And he paired with a guy named Safiso Rapinga. And Safiso came to Cambodia, which is where Lauren now lives, via Singapore, I want to say, but originally from South Africa. And so he does stuff and Lauren does stuff, and they connected. Now they work together doing this app gaming. And Safiso met a guy named Tom. Tom is from the UK, and they got to talking and said, wouldn't it be cool if we developed an app for mental health? What would such an app look like? And they kicked around some ideas. Neither one of them are from the profession, but they had this really cool idea. Like, what would it look like if people could just solve their own problems through this app, which is basically which is Noggin Notes, and it's a journal where you can record your own notes about your thinking and your feeling. So
the app is itself something you download to your phone.
Yes,
it's a journal that you're going to track your own mental health.
Yes,
awesome.
And the way this works is you open up the app, and so Lauren heard about this and said, you should connect with my friend Jake. He does this for a living. He could probably guide you. And so I looked at what they had, and it was a slew of emotions where you click on an emotion, and then it leads you to something else, and then you make a note about why you're feeling what you're feeling. It's insight-driven.
Okay.
So I looked at that, and I said, guys, I think this is a really, really great idea. What I would suggest is you use this research from this guy named Carol Izzard, who I reference all the time. He spent 50-some years studying human emotions, and use this set of 10 discrete emotions from which to then springboard into the other things. So the 10 I go over in the Noggin Notes podcast. You can listen to that. I'm not going to dive into it here, but those 10 emotions then lead to synonym emotions. So you might be feeling angry, but what kind of anger is it? Well, frustration, or am I pissed, or am I, am I just mildly irritated? So you can select that, and then you can make a note about it, and that note creates a timeline. And as a clinician, I can use this, and this has become very popular with school counselors. If you're a school counselor listening to this, I highly recommend pushing this into the hands of your students, especially from about middle school up, because they can really grasp it. And then in between appointments, they can log their thinking and feeling and bring it back to you, and you can process with them, how did this affect you, and what was going on, and what can we do differently in the future, and so on and so forth. So the podcast Noggin Notes is embedded into the app Noggin Notes, but you can do both of them separately. You can any podcast app will access Noggin Notes through Google Play or iTunes or whatever. And so Noggin Notes started out as just me teaching what I learned in graduate school, which I think everyone should know. I mean, things for like the 5 basic behavioral needs from William Glasser, or Carl Jung's psyche, or just very basic lessons that we all learn, cognitive behavioral stuff. And then it turned into more interviews and we just rap about stuff that we think is going to be useful to the listening audience, because I don't believe that the information I possess in my noggin is useful staying there. I think it needs to get out. It's not proprietary stuff. I mean, we need to share this so that people can get healthy and get better. Like I said, I want a healthy community.
Well, it's a wealth of different professional profiles. You know, the people that I've heard you bring on. I mean, I've heard really great interviews. Most recently was about play therapy. And that was such a neat breakdown, because I've never done any professional work in play therapy. I'm generally aware of it, and I've had some colleagues that I know do it. But to really hear your guest break it down and sort of explain, here's the theory behind this, and here's what we're trying to get at. And there's interviews like that all the time, which, as Nick he's joking, but there's some hard truth to this. Ours is a little bit more like goofball, but that is a great show if you're interested in psychology, if you're passionate about this as a profession, if you aspire to be a future professional, which many of our listeners actually come from the community of interns and students, and Noggin Notes, available anywhere you get podcasts. And I think the website is what?
NogginNotes.com.
Noggin Notes. It's NOGGIN NOTES, and also on Twitter at Noggin Notes.
Yep, I think it's at the Noggin Notes.
Okay.
I think it's at the Noggin Notes. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because that means a lot. And that was, I try to keep it short too initially. There have been some longer conversations, but we try to keep it about 12 to 15 minutes, just because
it's very to the point though.
I'm ripping off Mike Rowe is what I'm doing. Mike Rowe has the Way I Heard It, which is one of the best podcasts I've ever heard. It's like eight minutes long, and he's a wordsmith, and it's great. And I love the way he does it, because it's very catchy, and you can kind of listen, get a quick dose, and then move on.
It's so cool how people with podcasts, we were just talking to our engineer, and he was saying there's like so many podcasts out there now. People are calling them all the time, like, hey, we want to start one. And we read something the other day that said, like, quote, check out my podcast is the 30s and 40s equivalent of the 20s listen to my mixtape. Like, everybody has a podcast.
That's really funny.
But at least yours is a good one, and I think that it's a really interesting technique there too.
I love the app, and I wasn't even aware of the app. I'm gonna have to check that out, because I love the idea of journaling, especially things like with anger. So when I used to work with teenagers, that's one of the things that I used to do. Is I used to do that exact same thing, so that you can kind of track and identify any kind of patterns, and how is your anger and intensity, and then how quickly does it dissipate, and you can kind of look for anything that can be useful in therapy. I, of course, did it on an Excel spreadsheet, because I didn't know that technology existed, but that's awesome.
It's a great idea to put that in your pocket, and I like that it's not just an app, and it's not just something that you can use to track and use as a reference, but that it leads to resources and leads to information, especially that podcast. Because for a lot of people, that's a great coping skill to get out of their own head. It's just to have something to open up and then go, okay, I'm just going to listen to the most recent episode. And just that's 10, 15 minutes just to get them away from the place they're at, be thinking, self-inspective. I love it. That's just a tremendous idea.
And this is a nugget for people listening. The way I view what I do as a counseling professional is, I think that people just instinctively want to be happy. And so how do you get happy? You get what you want.
Right.
And how do you get what you want unless you know what you're looking for? So the way you get more, I guess, closer to what you want is you expand your options, you expand your view, and the way you do that is increased awareness. And my way of increasing people's awareness, there's lots of ways to increase awareness, but my way of doing it is education. I come from an education background, and so if I can teach people stuff that they don't normally know, and I can share with them what I learned in counselor school, then the expansion of awareness leads to better options leads to getting closer to what you want, and getting closer to what you want makes you happier. So
that's so neat.
And that's the intentionality
I think
behind
it's also interesting, as he's talking about how he bases his podcast off Mike Rowe. We base ours off Car Talk. And so everybody kind of has a mentor podcast. They're like, okay, that's the one I like, so I'm just going to do it that way. But that actually makes a lot of sense.
That does make sense.
Think about it.
Yeah.
So before we jump to our listener questions, we now have 3 therapists in the room, 2 good ones, and we'll find out which 2.
We're going to Rochambeau.
Yeah, we're going to Rochambeau. But before we jump into the listener mail and to the questions, I also have to ask about this role that you play in Nevada. And I'm a huge Nevada guy. We try not to make this podcast too saturated with Nevada history and Nevada need. But you are a actual public servant of Nevada. You serve in the behavioral health realm as a board of examiner, as the president of 2 of our main psychotherapeutic licensures. What made you feel like you wanted to step into that space, and what's your mission? What are you guys up to?
Okay,
how much time you got?
Yeah, no kidding. In a nutshell, and I've been public about this, so this shouldn't be news. It shouldn't be shocking, and my opinions tend to be pretty unvarnished because I'm getting a little older and I'm running out of patience. But
he's the therapist on the in the rocking chair on the porch, throwing rocks,
yelling at kids to get off my lawn. Yeah. But where it started was there's been a lot of frustration with our board historically, lack of responsiveness, lack of transparency, and what specifically started it was in our state we have an open meeting law that requires public bodies to post agendas and conduct their business transparently and then post meeting minutes about what transpired within a certain time frame, and that just wasn't happening. And so I started making noise, and then eventually the board turned over and some new people were appointed. We're all appointed by the governor through an application process and landed on the board and started making change. But I didn't realize how deep the rabbit hole went. 25 years worth of obfuscation and lack of attention to detail and just kind of laziness overall has led to a quagmire. And ours isn't the only board. There are some other boards catching heat for virtually the same stuff, and they're all transparent about it now. I just came Monday. I gave a presentation to the Legislative Committee on Healthcare to hold account for what we've been doing and why we are not doing what we should be doing, because collectively Nevada is 51st in almost every category you don't want to be 51st in. But specific to our profession, mental health care, mental health access, number of licensees, providers, I mean, all this stuff is just we're terrible at it. And a lot of it has to do with administrative function. We're not licensing people quickly. We've had a lot of people who haven't had the political spine to go make change and build consensus across professions with some of the other professions, and they are very different from one another, although we all call them therapists. There's marriage and family therapists, clinical professional counselors, clinical social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, which are MDs. They're a different breed altogether because they're doctors. Historically, they fought, and this is nationally. They stake out their turf, and then they snipe at each other, and we wonder why the system's broken, quote unquote, and why we have school shootings, and why people are taking their lives and getting addicted to painkillers, and it's because we as professionals are doing it to ourselves.
Right.
Yes. We're sabotaging America by being egocentric about the help that we give, and we just can't do that anymore. So that was my impetus for getting on here. And
that is such a relief to hear.
Yes. No, it really is. As people who have had to deal with these boards, we're very grateful for somebody to step forward and say, you know what, enough's enough.
Well, quite frankly, it's just not true. You reach across to your random clinical social worker, if I'm an MFT or whatever, and they don't care.
Right. Yeah. On the ground level, nobody cares.
This was all up at the top, highest level of the professional organizations nationally. Invoking this fear-based mentality, and it was just terrible. So, I'm just excited to put an end to it and increase flow and process and transparency and all that stuff. And I'm frankly, I mentioned earlier, I'd be happy to install drywall for a career if it meant that everybody around me was happy. And I have two kids. They're both under the age of 3. They're 5th generation. I'm 4th generation Nevadan.
Wow.
And I'm tired of being the laughingstock of the nation. I'm just sick of it. And if I can do something about that, even if it requires 30 extra hours a week of my free time, which I don't have because I have a family and a business, I'm going to do it because it's worth the next 30 years of my life not having to tolerate that anymore.
And your kids.
Right. Yeah. And I don't want them to grow up under the same lack of access to care where, they could be exposed to some violence at school or on the playground or somewhere else when that could have been totally prevented by people just getting out of each other's way.
Yeah. So, and obviously all Nevadans right now are clapping their hands. Like there's a lot of therapists listening to like, yes.
I appreciate that. I hope so.
October 1st of 2017, we had the largest mass shooting in American history, and it was right there on the Strip, the Mandalay Bay. That was a local man. He was from Mesquite, which is a town outside of Las Vegas, and this happened inside Las Vegas, and it affected everybody in the world to see this happen. And it does go back to this question of, isn't it somewhat interesting that this happened in the state that has the worst mental health resources in the country, and it's not even close.
Yeah. No. Yeah, that's the other thing. It's not like we're just equally spread out on some curve. We're the bottom by a lot.
Yeah.
You look at some of the numbers of psychiatrists and psychologists especially, we're doing sort of okay per capita with therapists, like master's level therapists, but doctors, the doctorate level clinicians, the psychologists, and then the actual MD physicians
MDs,
are nowhere to be found, and specifically child psychiatrists.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
We are the worst
category
by a long margin.
And actually, in addictions as well.
Yeah.
That's true, too.
The second worst
Access.
state in the nation is
and
Georgia.
yes,
and they
then
have 20
twice
per
as,
1,000.
Twice as many.
Yeah, and
as
we have
what
10.
have.
Yeah,
That's
so we have
It's
half
terrible.
as many as the other worst state in the nation. And if you're coming second to Georgia in anything, shame on you.
Yeah, well,
I'm taking shots.
So to that point, there's some workforce development going on in our state that I would like to see nationally. I mean, if I may be so bold, I'd like Zephyr Wellness to be the SpaceX of behavioral health. I mean, that'd be nice. I don't have PayPal funding me, but Elon Musk is. I think we're watching a legend of our own time do what he does. And one of the things that he shared in an interview about a year and a half ago was that he envisions gigafactories. We have a gigafactory up north near Reno. He envisions enough gigafactories, 12 or more, across the globe, producing enough batteries so that electric cars become as commonplace or even supplant gasoline cars so that everybody can have them. And I thought, what would that look like if behavioral healthcare or healthcare in general were so available that there was never an excuse not to receive it?
Right.
I don't know what that looks like, but there's workforce development going on. I've sat on a few task forces and panels that are exploring how do we get people into the profession. And one of the obstructions is we need the jobs to be funded. And right now, a lot of what needs funding, such as case managers, community health workers, they're not reimbursable services. So we reliant upon government funding or grant funding, which of course is tax driven or it's terminal, meaning grant runs out and then there may not be the money. There's only so much benevolence to go around. And I mean, it would be nice if we could siphon off some ad money from political campaigns into healthcare.
That would be pretty cool. But in the meantime, I think if all therapists start successful podcasts, eventually they'll all be self-funded. Yeah. This is how we put a drop into the ocean of the issue of the day.
It seems the most logical solution to this.
I think it is. That's how I do the math. So our guest today is Jake Wiskerchen, man of many talents, and Nick's chomping at the bit to ask him about his brewery. All right, Nick, go ahead.
I may or may not have brought gifts for you, by the way.
Oh, yes!
That's all I wanted.
You have to fight over them because there are three different kinds.
Nick
There's only
has so
two of
many
you.
questions.
How long have you been doing this?
Brewing?
Yeah.
So I got around home brewing 2007-ish, I want to say.
Okay.
But I didn't actually start brewing until 2010. So about 8 years.
8 years, wow.
And I just won an actual judged competition. I took a bronze in a Belgian category for a Belgian spice ale that I've made every year for Christmas annually called Clark Griswold.
Oh, nice! Oh, my gosh.
It's a quad. It's a quad.
Everybody respect what just happened.
I'm pretty proud of that
done.
because that's the first actual judged beer that I've won. I've won a couple of People's Choice or crowd vote type things, but it's easy to wow somebody with a sample size of the newest newfangled thing. And mine happened to be a hard root beer before the hard root beer craze took over, and so people were drinking. "Well, what is this?" Yeah. And I was like, "Oh well, put your vote in the box."
Yeah.
So that was cool. That was a few years back, and then now I'm like the hipster of hard root beer. I was doing that 2 years before it was cool. But I enjoy it, and I have a draft system at home. But I stick with extract brewing. I don't care to take up to the all grain level because I think it would turn my fun little art hobby into a neurotic science because I know how I am. And before you know it, I'm dunking.
The Breaking Bad of therapists.
Putting $3,000 into a brewing system. And, it's like, I don't need to do that.
Do you have a label? Is your label like a name to it?
Whiskers Brewery.
That's right. I've seen the picture, the little logo.
Yeah.
What's the logo look like?
It's a puppy.
It's a puppy holding a bottle in its teeth. It's designed by a friend.
Yeah, no, and I'm gonna
We're
put
on
up
Untapped.
on our
You can check in your beers.
Yes, it's fun, and I'll put up a picture on our Twitter of your tap heads. They're all broken baseball bats. I showed you this, didn't I?
You did show me
that. They're all these
That's
broken
really
baseball
cool.
bats and like a baseball one. And it's
I
pretty
played
funny.
hardball for a number of years and finally hung up my spikes when my body didn't work anymore. But I used the bats. I just sawed them off and installed a little 3/8 inch threaded thing to screw onto the tab.
That is great.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
And I love the names that you come up with for things. I wish,
the Clark
like, that's
Griswold.
the thing. Yeah, like I don't have that talent. Like, I can never think of anything original.
Right.
It takes me a while. That was a gem. They're not all that cool. A lot of them are named after my dogs or my kids or something around the house. I'm like, Northwood IPA because that's the street I live on. Gosh. Cool, Jake. Way to step out of the box.
If you're going to name beers after family, you better be real careful. If you pick like a bitter IPA and you name it after your wife, like it's going to be a problem. She'll be like, why this one? Oh, it's very
floral and sweet.
Yeah.
Because you're flowery and sweet.
You're flowery. Why does nobody like that one? I mean, I don't know. IPA is an acquired taste.
Are you saying I'm an acquired taste? You're married to me and you're off the market.
You're reading into this.
Hey, look what's on TV.
I'm going to go back to the garage. Got to record some noggin
notes. Is that Property Brothers? Here, babe. No, we can't afford that kitchen.
You're describing my life. Oh. My wife is not listening to this, but if she was, she'd be like, wait, who just said that? Which one of them? Go back to the camera on this one. Oh, man. Well, Jake, you are a fascinating guest, a good therapist, and apparently an award-winning brewer. Yeah, so far. So we have set expectations at the ground level for our listeners. The good news is, if you say anything that's even remotely usable, they will be freshly surprised. Yeah. There you go. They do not turn into the show to get actually good advice. So guess what? Today's going to be a stunning day for everybody. But with that, I think that we can actually jump into our listener mail. And Mr. Tangeman, why don't you kick us off with our very first question?
Okay, here we go. I'm curious what makes people end up with abusers again and again. I grew up in an abusive household and then married into one. Ever since, it seems no matter what I do, every person I date ends up being horrible. The first person was a few years after I left my ex-husband. I settled for a nice guy thinking that was the answer. He said dating me was like something out of the 50s. I took it slow. Everything was perfect until suddenly, one day, I wasn't allowed to hang out alone with my girlfriends in addition to a bunch of other crap. It ended when he said it was him or my cat. Goodbye. I didn't date for 3 years and then met this amazing guy. Things were great until a few months later, he got drunk and started yelling at me. Then that relationship ended. How do I not go there ever again and actually pick a normal human being?
So first thought on this one, Nick, she said that there was a guy that whenever he was dating her, he said it's like being in the 50s. Maybe he meant the 50s in Saudi Arabia. You know, you got to be clear. He could have just meant like, I don't want you talking to anybody and, just stay here and don't drive and wear this trash bag. So you just got to be clear. You got to ask these questions. But so wow, that's a fascinating question. And, I draw the line whenever it's me or my I have a Chihuahua named Pumpkin. And that's the hill I'll die on right there.
Absolutely.
Don't ask me to choose. Okay, that's my third child, so that's impossible choices. But Jake, I imagine you've seen people like this, people that have a history of abusive relationships, but then notice that they just, through no fault of their own, or so they think, they are repeating this process where they end up with very similar people. It's almost like a template, and it's confusing. What do you make of that?
So coincidentally, Noggin Notes may or may not have a podcast on abusive relationships.
Excellent cross-promotion. Excellent.
Which
will be available on our Twitter.
The second installment of which will be coming out, I think, this week.
We're going to edit all this out.
Yeah.
Jake never appeared.
That's right. These guys were just laughing a lot. There's like no third person. Yeah. So give us a taste of what some of that content will be.
So what really jumps out at me, and through my filter, I see every person I date ends up being horrible, and I fundamentally don't believe in horrible human beings. I think human beings are good by nature, and I think our environments tend to take us in directions where our behaviors then become undesirable. So I would jump on that language. It sounds a little judgmental, but I get where they're coming from. So I think that the pattern is such that I'm going to go Carl Jung direction here. I'm kind of a Jungian guy at heart.
I'm anti-union.
That's fine. Local 457. Jungian, Jungian. Carl Jung. He's a pretty big name in our field, and he died in 1961, but his work lives on. And part of what he said is that our ego has become this judgmental term, and it's not. It's very neutral. It's just the most familiar place of our awareness. So what we know best we'll tend to gravitate to. So if it's what you know, you're gonna be drawn to it without usually knowing. So nobody raises their hand and clears their throat and says, "I'd like some of that abuse."
Right.
But if it's familiar, it feels like home, and so you tend to go back into those patterns. So this is where the awareness building comes in. If you can become aware of that, then it's easier to choose differently. The problem is, it's hard to look at oneself because it's very scary, because you have to look and see things that you may not want to notice. And so this pattern, I would submit that probably there's some signs. There's probably some red flags. I don't imagine that it's quite as binary, meaning either or, all or nothing, as it's being laid out here. Is everything is perfect. Everything's a very extreme word. All, nothing. Everything is very extreme. I don't think everything was perfect until suddenly one day I wasn't allowed to hang out alone with my girlfriend.
Hints.
No doubt. And so that's the type of awareness I'm talking about. If you can step back and neutrally examine, as if you're a disinterested third party, just looking at transactional relationship between people, you probably see everything's not perfect, and what happens is that ego tends to clear a path for your reality to reconcile actual reality while overlooking a lot of really red flags.
Right.
So if you were to bounce that off as somebody who's been watching that the whole time, they go, "Hey, what about this? What about this? What about this?" And that's the scary part. You go, "Ooh, I don't want to see that because that's a reflection on me and my ability to choose, or judge things or discern." So that and then later, things were great until a few months, and he got drunk and started yelling at me. I'm not buying it. I don't think that
things were not great. He was probably hints.
Totally. Or he maybe you got duped.
That does happen. I mean, there's such a thing as being catfished, but the thing I kind of hear you saying in your theme there is, I guess some would call that re-traumatizing, that I'm kind of reenacting something that I've gone through in the past, but you're using this word but it's familiar to you.
It's home. It's
home.
And I say comfortable, meaning it's predictable, not that it's comfortable and pleasant. But we see this in cycles and patterns of all sorts, from substance abuse to relationships to just somebody like me who has 2 master's degrees and couldn't leave college, apparently, because that was home. Now, looking back with the education and insight that I have, I look back and go, "Ooh, I was attracted to campus because campus was comfortable and familiar to me. Right. It wasn't going to get me out into the work world unless I made the very scary step away, letting go of what I thought I knew well and embracing, I don't know, big question mark. So not having something to grab onto is very terrifying.
Right.
And if you're not good at tolerating the emotion of fear, you're not going to invite it in.
Familiar.
And mystery is very, very scary.
Yeah. So I was kind of thinking, because I see this a lot in addictions treatment when we talk about like family roles and how people create an identity based off of the role that they had growing up. So, for example, the oldest child kind of taking on that family hero role, that becomes part of their identity, is that they see themselves as, I am the helper. I'm the one that people have to rely on. Right. So then as they get older, they become an adult. What kind of relationship are they going to be attracted to? They're not going to be attracted to somebody. Help. Exactly.
Wow, that's really true. My wife and I are both firstborn in our families, and that's exactly it. That's so interesting. And my little sister tends to be, as we look at her dating history, she tends to end up with people that are, second or third child in their family.
Well, yeah, and if I'm an adult and my whole identity has been set around me helping other people, then people who don't need help are not very attractive to me. Right. If I get into that relationship, then what do I have to offer?
That's interesting. And the writer here talks about, I grew up in an abusive household. So I really hear that both of you are kind of humming back to this concept of, listen, you're reenacting some of this past history of brokenness because it's what you grew up with. And it looks like it just falls out of the sky to you, but a therapist would put all these little data points on a graph and start connecting the dots and then trying to challenge what you like and look for in other people.
And I would stack onto that the notion that when one's identity becomes such that they seek these things out, challenging and leaving that identity is scary because it leaves you identityless. So if I'm I'm a firstborn also, and I do happen to be a caretaker. I like helping people. Clearly, I'm in this profession and I'm sacrificing lots of my personal time to do public service. So stepping away from that and being okay with letting go with somebody else having control. I've learned to delegate. That was very tough for me. I've had to learn to let go of some stuff and delegation. that's tough for me because I have to let go of the role that I need to be in charge. So somebody who's a caretaker, somebody who's a scapegoat, all these roles that we learn about from family systems courses, they'll tell you that role isn't necessarily permanent. It can be changed, but stepping away from it is very, very challenging. And so consider, for example, the role of a parent who has a sick child. If that child gets healthy, it almost leaves the parent identityless, which is frightening because you're stepping into I don't know what you're stepping into. So learning to embrace mystery, I think, is very, very important in our clinical work as well.
So at the end of that question, I read the writer saying, how do I not do that again? How do I pick a, quote, normal human being? As therapists, we usually don't love the word normal. But you know what? I do like this question because what I kind of hear in Jake's answer and I kind of hear in Nick's answer, it sounds like the synthesis of our advice on this is probably, can we begin with some self-examination? Can we try to connect these dots of your past relationship history, imagine where this comes from? Does it come from, what I grew up with? Is it familiar to me? And if that's the case, am I ignoring red flags? Am I seeking personality traits that seem natural to me, but actually are the warning signs of somebody who might be pretty unhealthy and might not respect me or give me good space? So good answers, guys. I really appreciate it. This is nice. It's nice having a true MFT on the program here because now I don't have to make stuff up anymore. Next question.
I feel like people are going to know that we've been imposters this whole time.
Well, yeah. If they watch our video on podtherapy.net, they'll see that you just got anointed with a clinical professional counselor license. And so, yeah, they were going to figure this out. This has all been a sham.
So going to Jung again, that would be called a persona projection. It's a mask that you wear to cover up the fear inside.
Oh, my gosh. All right. Next question. This one is a good one. And this is actually I want to read this one. This one's really interesting. How can I cope with hair pulling? I have trichotillomania. Whenever I feel an episode coming on, I open a note on my phone, which has coping lists of activities. I choose one of these from the list, and I replace my urge to pick my hair with that activity. This list is what works to keep my hands busy. Here's my list. Number 1. Epilate leg and armpit hair. Here's my list. Number 1, I'll pull my leg or armpit hair. Number 2, I'll pet the dogs. 3, masturbate. 4, eat a snack. 5, take a shower. 6, do a short exercise. 7, deep breaths. 8, paint my nails. 9, bake. 10, meal prep. Or 11, work on an art project. Or 12, watch YouTube videos on a playlist. Is this a good way to cope? It's working so far. Will I have to use this for the rest of my life? What else should I be doing? Good question. But we should probably start, guys, with what is that very interesting sounding word? And Nick, you were helping me pronounce it earlier.
Trichotillomania?
I always pronounce it trichotillomania.
Trichotillomania.
I don't know.
That's how I
actually
pronounce
don't know.
I know they call it trick for short. Those who so there's actually a very thriving community. So for the listener, trichotillomania is obsessive and compulsively pulling hair from your body, and people that have this might break the follicles of their hair, and you might notice that their hair is short or unhealthy, and they might be removing it from their scalp. And it's a compulsive behavior. It's something they can't stop themselves from doing. It's very similar in that way to addiction, Nick. That you don't seem to know why you're doing it. You tend to go in autopilot. But before we bring it to the table here, one thing I love about this question, and I'm going to tell you right now where I think this question came from. This last weekend, over Twitter, we got followed by a lovely artist named Liz out in the United Kingdom, out in Britain. And she is a huge advocate for this population. She lives with this, and she has come up with amazing ways to cope. And the way that she copes is wherever she is in the world, if she feels the urge to reach up and pull her hair out, what she will do instead is she will pull out charcoal paints, and she will graffiti anything she can get her hands on. So she'll grab a newspaper, and she'll just draw on it. And this has become this sort of live performance art that she'll do on the subways. And then she gives that portrait to whoever's standing next to her, and people started filming her doing this. And now she has like tens of thousands of people that follow her just to watch her do this, but she brings a lot of attention to this population. She followed us over the weekend, and so I think this is probably a question from one of the folks associated with her tribe, and we're so grateful to have you. And what a great question. Jake, when you take a look at that, coping skills, making a list, having an app on her phone kind of sounds a lot like Noggin Notes kind of stuff.
It does, and I don't want to stifle anybody's creative talent. I want to lead with the idea that If it's working for you, don't quit. That being said, I am of the opinion that I'm not into symptom treatment. I'm into problem resolution. And I think a large part of what we do as clinicians is we diagnose symptoms that are all contained in our Bible, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, otherwise known as DSM.
KJV.
Yep. The DSM gives us how to recognize every mental disorder. It doesn't tell us how to treat them. And in my estimation, and this is purely me, I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody else. I believe that those diagnoses are symptomatology. They're not problems. We talk in terms of I have a problem with anxiety, but I think if we change the language and say I have a symptom of anxiety, we want to look to see what the problem is that's giving rise to this anxiety or this depression, the bipolar disorder, the whatever it is, trichotillomania. So what I found is that if we attack one symptom, throw a bunch of coping skills at it, that symptom will go away. And it's good for evidence-based practice because we can measure that and we can quantify it and we can say 6 months after treatment, you're still done, and you can see me wiping my hands on the microphone. Hey, we're good. It worked.
Yeah.
But what popped up next was something we didn't see. So we took care of your drinking, but now you got anxiety. Take care of your anxiety, now you're depressed. Take care of your depression,
like
now you got therapeutic whack-a-mole is exactly what I call it. And I'd rather unplug the machine.
Right.
I don't want to keep sitting there whacking moles. That's great for client continuity of care and making sure that the bills get paid and stuffing my wallet. But I am not interested in that. As I stated earlier, I want a healthy community. I don't want a bunch of people who are just transmorphing into different symptom presentations. So as much as I like the coping skills, if they're working great. I would want to dig in to find out why you're doing this, because I have a fundamental belief that people aren't born broken. It doesn't make any sense. It's not harmonious with nature. So therefore, if you're not born broken, we could reasonably redirect you back to wholesomeness, and this would just go away. So I find that if we're diving deep into people and meeting them, seeing through their outward behavior presentation and meeting them at their true self and their soul, and treating that, and it's probably something that doesn't have a diagnostic code attached to it that we can't send up to insurance, like doesn't feel good about oneself, doesn't know where one is going in life, has a lot of trauma history. Those aren't diagnosable conditions. But if we start talking about that, where do you want to be when you grow up? Where are you going in life? Give a sense of meaning and purpose and direction and fulfillment. Then the symptoms just disappear. They go away.
So I kind of hear you saying, let's take a look at this hair pulling. And yes, good coping skills. If it's working, it's working. I'm not here to pull you away from that. But if I can go deeper with the writer, my question is the hair pulling a symptom of something that we don't have a word for yet?
Right.
And as a therapist, if I were working with you, I'd be very curious to get to know you on a deeper level, to better understand why this behavior may have developed in your life.
And if I go to behaviorism, a behaviorist would ask, what's the function of that?
What's the function?
What does it serve? We go to Glasser's 5 needs. Power and control might be one of them. It gives you an outlet, a sense of power and control. I can pull my own hair. It saves me from having to hurt
me
something
this
else.
way.
Sure.
Like a lot of cutters will express that they hurt themselves by cutting because they can't control the hurt from other people or from emotions.
Or how I was taught that in one context, self-harm of any stripe. It could be cigarette smoking. Cigarette smoking is not healthy. It's self-harm.
Sure.
So self-harm of any kind is it's a quantification, meaning it's a way to box up and label how big am I hurting?
Right.
How big is psychological pain? We don't know. It's however big you make it. So if I can cut myself and go, that's how much I hurt.
That's
right
how
there.
much I hurt.
And of course, there's the physiological response that endorphins come and serotonin's released and whatnot. And physiologically, it feels good too. So it's a release, but to the question of will I have to use this the rest of my life, I would say no. I don't think that's appropriate. If that were the case, and symptoms or people's psychological distresses could never be completely overcome, and they were just, this is what it is, you're just going to be stuck with it the rest of your life, we'd be out of a profession where our profession would cease to exist. No one would ever heal. We wouldn't have testimonies of people saying, I used to do this and now I don't do it anymore.
Right.
And it's not because I've just substituted it with something else.
Right.
I'm not drinking alcohol anymore. I'm just sucking down 6 pots of coffee and 4 cigarettes a day. Like, I don't know if that's as healthy.
Coped. And actually, to take that concept, Nick, this interesting, obsessive and compulsive behavior, as Jake just said, it's probably a symptom of something deeper. It's probably, affiliated with that. coping is a great way to begin the journey into healing, but it's probably, we probably don't want you doing the same exact checklist 3 years into your recovery. And recovery is probably the right way to describe this. Coming from an addictions, kind of perspective, this could almost be looked at as a behavioral addiction in a sense. I mean, how do you look at coping skills, and what do you think about how long they should probably be around and ideas like that?
With the coping skills, I would agree first, with what Jake had said, right away, which is that, I mean, at least for the short term, if it's working, then that's great.
That.
You found something that at least, keeps you safe.
Right.
That's a great place to start.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think we need to continue to expand on that. And, like when we talk about addiction, there's always something deeper than that. There's, we talked about trauma. That trauma and addiction go hand in hand. They're so closely tied together that we can't just focus on, what are some ways of dealing with cravings, and that's it.
Right.
And then we're just going to stop there.
Yeah.
We have to get into, what's driving that? What's going on with this trauma? What is it that we are trying to accomplish by getting drunk, by getting high?
Yes.
By allowing things to get out of control.
So this and that, the hair pulling, obsessive hair pulling, can be seen in that same light, which is, and it goes back to what Jake had said. What is the function of this behavior? What does this do for you, consciously or subconsciously? How is this alleviating some kind of suffering? And Jake had brought up the point. This could be a way to measure pain. How hurting were you? I was 3/5 of Jack hurting.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way to say that. Or I was half of my head of hair hurting. And Nick, what I hear you saying is, when it comes to these coping skills, use them, but also, yes, even from a very clear addiction standpoint, we do want to dig deeper underneath this. And so it looks like to the writer here, to the listener, the advice is, yes, keep doing what you're doing, but we do probably want to see you make progress. There might be some coping skills you do for the rest of your life. That might be true. And if that's keeping the tiger at bay, fine. But, Jake, what I hear you saying is, as a therapist, I'm not quite satisfied if that's the way you have to live forever. I would like to continue doing the work.
I think that comes through in the final question, or the final statements here. Is this a good way to cope? I'm not going to judge that. If it's working, it's working. It's working so far. Inherently implies, will it continue? Mm-hmm. And then, will I have to use this the rest of my life? What else should I be doing? Yeah. So the writer inherently understands that this is not going to work forever.
Right.
And I think we all have the intrinsic idea that we are bigger and deeper than we realize. And so these are good questions to ask, because it implies that there's something greater that can be done. Similarly, we wouldn't want somebody on painkillers is a good example, but we wouldn't want them in medication the rest of their lives. The reason we use a symptom alleviation, coping skills, medication, whatever alleviates the symptoms, is so that talk therapy can take root and behavioral change, real actual behavioral change can take effect. We don't believe that people should use some external substitute as a crutch to manage their stuff forever, because our bodies just won't hold up. I mean, even working out, there are people who work out into their 80s, but you're not working out at the level you were in your 20s. Yeah. And so if you're relying, quote, you can't see the air quotes because we're on the radio, but if you're relying on that coping skill, and then that coping skill isn't available, then what? Right. And so this is a nice list, but what if these things aren't available? What if you're in the middle of a class at school? You can't masturbate there. You can't pet the dogs. You can't eat a snack. You
it's
can't
frowned
take
upon. It's frowned upon.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Depends on the class.
Yeah. If you're at UNR, they'll allow it.
But truly, and I'm of the opinion that if you have the insight enough to use a coping skill, you have the insight enough not to do the behavior and to channel that stress somewhere else.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and I think that the way I almost would say this is it unfair to describe coping skills as training wheels. That it's entirely appropriate when you're learning how to ride a bike. In fact, it's strongly encouraged when you're learning how to ride a bike, and it's a good safety mechanism.
I don't want to face on the pavement a bunch of times to learn how to balance.
Yeah. It's a safe way to begin the ride. But then eventually we probably want to experiment with taking those off and seeing how far you get on your own and learning some new skills, which is the riding of the bike, and that's the living of the life. Great question, great topic. So thankful to these new listeners, and really encourage you to stay with it. And if I could throw in one, side argument here, I noticed that you had 12.
Case closed.
Case closed. I noticed you had 12 little things. I would, encourage you to even throw dice, like throw dice and say, "Oh, I got 7." That's what I'm going to do. That's another way to kind of play with it. But again, coping skills are something that you should do, can do, will do, and we can also go deeper. We can also do more.
But I think I heard you saying another thing that when you deal with anxiety, we all have our ways of dealing with this stuff. And part of what we want to do is normalize the conversation, too, that part of human behavior, going back to the previous question, is what's a normal human being? Well, we all have the capacity to do everything that any other human has done. If it's human nature, you have that nature as a human. So when you were talking about dealing with anxiety at one point, you started counting things because it pulled you from your limbic system into your cognition, which then diminished the anxiety.
Yes.
Anxiety is usually driven by fear or excitement. And so if you're cognitively throwing dice and counting what you got, that would diminish the limbic behind the anxious hair pulling. Is that what I'm understanding?
I think so. And, so what we're discussing here, I think the way I compare the human brain is sometimes to a smartphone. There's like software, there's firmware, there's hardware. But the thing that, and we'll have to bring this to another episode, but this idea of neuroplasticity, the brain changing over time. I think coping skills help the brain change over time physically. Yeah. So for me and my anxiety, it began by counting and going into more of a cognitive mode. And then over time, I didn't really have to reach for that. It was like my brain just sort of knew to go in that direction when faced with something very emotional or
Which
scary.
is why we don't want to eliminate coping skills altogether.
Yeah, they're welcome.
I'm never saying that. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, you're not going to hear therapists say either or a lot. We usually say both and I think this is a great set of skills. Do more of that. Thank you so much for writing in. And guys, if you have questions out there, you come down to podtherapy.net, you send those in anonymously, or you can email us or put us on the Facebook, facebook.com/podtherapy. Lots of great places where you can send it our way. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and thank you to our guests.
Yes, thank you to our special guest.
I appreciate you guys having me. And we kid each other and we laugh and we giggle and we poke each other in the ribs. But honestly, this is such an honor to be able to hang out with other well-functioning, highly ethical, driven people who are stepping out of their zone to give something to the community for completely free so that we can all get better. I just, anytime, seriously, when we can do this over the phone or something.
Absolutely.
I'm still trying to find a good phone recorder that doesn't sound like
I've been looking
robot.
for an opportunity to go up to Tahoe, so this is now our excuse.
I have a spare bedroom and we're 40 minutes away.
Done.
Should be able to tax deduct that, I believe.
I think that counts.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
All right. That's all the time we've got for this week's session. Thank you to those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy or on Twitter @podtherapyguys.
Do you want to add your own advice to today's questions? Post your thoughts at podtherapy.net and join the conversation. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm Jake Wiskerchen.
You wish.
And that's Jim Jobin. Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.
Go Wolfpack.